The transformer housing was making that sound again, a low metallic groan that most people wouldn't notice over the ambient hum of the substation. But I'd been listening to these machines for 30 years, and that groan meant the cooling system on Unit 7 was running 15 degrees hotter than spec. Not enough to trigger the automated alarms, just enough to shorten the equipment's lifespan by another few months. I made a note on my clipboard at 11:47 p.m., standing in the March cold outside Millbrook substation, and wondered how much longer I'd be the one making these notes. My name's Robert Malloy. I'm 52 years old, and until 3 days ago I thought I'd retire from this place. Turns out the new management had different plans. Plans that didn't include night walks around equipment older than most of their executive team. Plans that would put 50,000 people in the dark, but they didn't know that yet. Let me take you back to how I got here. 1994. Fresh out of 6 years with the Coast Guard working electrical systems on cutters and stations along the Atlantic. My wife Jennifer was pregnant with our daughter Sarah, and we'd moved back to her hometown of Millbrook, Pennsylvania. Coal country, population 50,000, the kind of place where 3 generations work at the same plant, and everyone knows your family history before you introduce yourself. Tri-State Energy operated the regional power distribution, and they needed someone who understood electrical systems and wasn't afraid of the 24/7 nature of keeping the lights on. The substation I walked into in 1994 was already 18 years old. The main transformers had been installed in 1976, built by Westinghouse before they stopped making that particular model. Heavy industrial equipment designed to last 30 years, maximum. We were already pushing the lifespan when I started. The regional manager back then, a guy named Harold Vickers who'd worked power since the 1960s, walked me through the facility on my first day and told me something I'd never forget. "Rob," he said, "these machines are past their prime. Corporate keeps promising replacement budget, but it never comes. Your job isn't to make them work like new. Your job is to keep them working, period. That means you learn every sound, every vibration, every temperature variance. You become more sensitive than any sensor we've got, because sensors can't tell you when a transformer is about to fail 3 weeks before it happens. But you can, if you pay attention." I paid attention. Spent my first year doing double shifts, learning the equipment during the day and walking the night checks that Harold insisted on. The automated monitoring system could track basic metrics: voltage, current, temperature thresholds. But it couldn't hear the bearing in Transformer 4 starting to wear down. Couldn't feel the slight vibration in the cooling pump that meant the impeller was developing microfractures. Couldn't smell the insulation starting to degrade in the bus connections. Harold retired in 1999. I inherited his shift rotation and his handwritten logs. 3 decades of observations about equipment quirks that existed nowhere in the official documentation. Unit 3 runs hot after storms because moisture gets into the housing seal. Unit 7's cooling system needs manual adjustment when ambient temperature drops below 25 degrees. The main breaker on the north distribution line has a tendency to stick if you don't cycle it weekly. Every note was a lesson learned from equipment failure that Harold had prevented or fixed before it became catastrophic. By 2000, I was the senior electrical engineer on site, and the equipment was 24 years old. Corporate kept pushing replacement timelines back. Budget constraints, infrastructure investments in other regions. Always next year, next budget cycle, next quarter. Meanwhile, I was maintaining transformers that were running 10 years past their rated lifespan. The night checks became critical. Between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., when load was lowest, I'd walk the entire facility. Check temperatures manually with an infrared thermometer because the automated sensors had blind spots. Listen to each transformer's hum for irregularities. Inspect connections for signs of arcing or corrosion. make adjustments that kept 1970s equipment running in the 2000s. Jennifer understood. Mostly. She knew the nature of the work when we married. But understanding doesn't make it easier when your husband is gone every night from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m., 7 days a week, 365 days a year. I'd come home, sleep until 7 a.m., spend the morning with Sarah before school, work my day shift from 9 to 5, have dinner with the family, and head back out at 10:45 p.m. For years, that was my life. The rhythm of keeping a town's power running on equipment that should have been replaced before my daughter was born. Sarah's 16 now. Jennifer died 8 years ago from an aneurysm. Sudden, no warning. One day she was planning Sarah's 8th birthday party, and the next day I was a widowed single father trying to explain death to a second grader while still maintaining power for 50,000 people who never knew how close we came to failure every single night. Those first 2 years after Jennifer died were the hardest of my life. Sarah needed her father present, but the substation needed me more. At least that's what I told myself. Truth was, the night walks were easier than sitting in an empty house remembering what I'd lost. Sarah learned to be independent earlier than most kids, made her own breakfast before school, did homework without supervision, put herself to bed most nights because Dad was at the substation making sure the transformers didn't overheat. She never complained directly, just started asking fewer questions about my work, stopped telling me about her day, developed that polite distance kids create when they've accepted that their parents' job comes first. Last year, she made the varsity volleyball team as a sophomore. First home game, I promised I'd be there. Got called to the substation at 6 p.m. because Unit 4 was showing temperature spikes. By the time I'd stabilized it and confirmed the cooling system wasn't failing, the game was over. I came home to find Sarah already in her room, door closed, not interested in hearing my explanation. That happened 3 more times last season. Eventually, I stopped promising to attend. The equipment kept aging. By 2024, we were running transformers that were 48 years old, nearly double their rated lifespan. The maintenance budget had been cut every year since 2015. Corporate had reorganized twice, merged with a larger holding company, and shifted focus to renewable energy investments in other states. Our little coal country substation in Pennsylvania wasn't a priority. We were legacy infrastructure. In a region with declining population, kept operational on minimal budget because shutting us down would be politically complicated. But keeping 1976 transformers running in 2024 required more than minimal budget. It required institutional knowledge that existed almost entirely in my head and in Harold's old notebooks that I'd inherited. It required physical presence, manual adjustments, immediate response to warning signs that automated systems couldn't detect. It required someone who cared enough to walk the substation every night even when corporate had stopped paying overtime for it years ago. I'd submitted my maintenance recommendations every quarter for a decade. Replace the main transformers, upgrade the cooling systems, install modern monitoring equipment. Every recommendation came back denied or deferred. Budget constraints. We'll revisit next year. Have you considered optimizing existing resources instead? That last one was from 3 years ago, from a regional manager who'd never set foot in our facility and thought optimization meant running equipment harder with less maintenance. The promotion meeting happened on a Monday in March. I'd been acting supervisor for the Millbrook facility for 8 years without the title or pay increase. The official supervisor role had been vacant since 2016, with me covering the responsibilities while corporate claimed they were conducting a national search for qualified candidates. Every review, they'd thank me for my flexibility and dedication. Every review, I'd ask about the promotion timeline. Every review, they'd promise to revisit it next quarter. This time felt different. The regional VP, Martin Kelso, had scheduled a meeting specifically to discuss facility leadership. I'd prepared documentation showing 8 years of perfect uptime, 0 major failures, cost savings from my maintenance approach versus equipment replacement. I'd outlined my qualifications, my institutional knowledge, my track record. I walked into that meeting thinking I'd finally get recognition for 3 decades of keeping their infrastructure running. Martin sat across his desk in the regional office, barely glancing at my documentation. "Rob, I appreciate everything you've laid out here. Your dedication to Millbrook is noted, but we've made a decision about facility leadership that I think you'll be excited about." I waited. That phrasing, "you'll be excited about," was corporate speak for something I definitely wouldn't be excited about. "We're bringing in Trevor Hastings as the new director of regional operations. Trevor just completed his MBA at Columbia, worked in energy consulting for 3 years, and brings a fresh perspective on grid optimization and modern operational efficiency. He starts next Monday. Trevor Hastings." I knew that name. Martin Kelso's nephew, 29 years old. Never worked at an actual power facility, just consulted for companies about operational improvements he'd never have to implement himself. "I see," I said carefully. "And my role?" "You'll continue as senior electrical engineer. Trevor will need your expertise during the transition. Someone with your hands-on knowledge will be invaluable as we move toward more data-driven operational models." Data-driven operational models. That was consultant language for replacing human judgment with algorithms that didn't understand that Transformer 7's cooling system couldn't be managed by data alone. "What's his experience with legacy equipment?" I asked. "Our transformers are 48 years old. They don't respond to standard management approaches. Trevor's worked with utilities across the Northeast. He's familiar with aging infrastructure challenges." Martin checked his watch, signaling the meeting was ending. "I'm confident you two will work well together. Maybe prepare some orientation materials for him before next Monday." I walked out of that office and drove the 40 minutes back to Millbrook in complete silence. No radio, no phone calls, just the sound of tires on asphalt and my own thoughts about what I'd just heard. 30 years. 3 decades of night shifts and emergency calls and manual adjustments that kept equipment running years past its expiration date. And they'd hired a consultant's nephew with an MBA to manage operations he didn't understand at a facility he'd never seen. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in 8 years. I sat down with Sarah after dinner and actually talked to her. Not the usual quick check-in about homework and school, but real conversation about her life, her plans, her college applications. She was surprised enough to put down her phone. "Dad, are you okay? You seem weird." "Weird how? Like you're actually here, not thinking about the substation." "I've been thinking about priorities. Maybe I've had them wrong for a while." She studied my face with that teenage ability to detect parental distress. "Something happened at work. They hired someone new, someone with an MBA and no experience to manage the facility I've been running for 8 years. That sucks." Her teenage summary was accurate. "Are you going to quit?" I thought about that. No. But I think I'm done doing more than what I'm paid for. For 30 years, I've been keeping that place running on dedication and institutional knowledge. Time for them to see what that's actually worth. What does that mean? It means I'm going to follow my job description exactly. No more free overtime. No more going above and beyond. Just the work they actually pay me to do. Sarah grinned. "About time you stopped letting them take advantage of you." Smart kid. She saw what I'd been refusing to see for years. Trevor Hastings arrived the following Monday morning driving a Tesla and wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. 29 years old, perfectly styled haircut, wireless earbuds in, carrying an iPad instead of the safety gear you actually need in an active electrical facility. He called an all-hands meeting for 10 a.m. without bothering to check if that time interfered with critical operations. It did. We had a planned maintenance shutdown on the north distribution line that required precise timing with the grid operator. "Team," he started, projecting slides from his iPad to a screen he'd had installed in the break room overnight. "I'm excited to join Tri-State Energy and bring modern operational excellence to our regional facilities. I've been reviewing our systems, and I see significant opportunities for optimization. We're going to implement smart grid technologies, leverage IoT sensor networks, and utilize predictive analytics to improve efficiency by at least 30%. My colleague Marcus Chen, who'd worked maintenance for 15 years, raised his hand. "Most of our equipment is from the 1970s. It doesn't have IoT capability. The monitoring systems are analog." Trevor smiled like Marcus had asked an adorably naive question. "Everything can be upgraded. We'll bring in contractors to install modern sensors and replace outdated monitoring equipment. I've already got quotes from 3 vendors. Should take about 6 weeks. Our transformers are 48 years old," I said from the back of the room. "Any modification to the monitoring systems risks disrupting operations we've calibrated over decades. We're running equipment that should have been replaced 20 years ago. It's held together with expertise and manual oversight." "Rob, right." Trevor looked at his iPad, probably reading my bio. "I appreciate your historical knowledge, but that's exactly the kind of legacy thinking we need to move past. Modern analytics can do what manual oversight does, but better and more consistently. No offense, but we can't rely on one person's institutional knowledge. That's a sustainability risk." Sustainability risk. He was calling my 3 decades of expertise a liability. "Have you ever worked at an active substation?" I asked. "Managed transformers during a grid emergency? Diagnosed equipment failure at 2 a.m. when the automated systems are showing normal readings, but you can hear that something's wrong?" "I've consulted for utilities managing portfolios worth billions," he replied smoothly. "The principles scale. Now let's talk about the operational schedule. I'm implementing some changes to improve work-life balance and reduce overtime costs." He pulled up another slide showing the new shift rotation. The night maintenance checks, my 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. walks, had been eliminated entirely. According to Trevor's schedule, we'd rely on automated monitoring systems overnight with on-call coverage only for emergencies flagged by the sensors. "The night checks are critical," I said, keeping my voice level. "The automated systems can't detect the warning signs that precede equipment failure. Those walks have prevented dozens of major failures over the years." "The data doesn't support that," Trevor said, tapping his iPad. "I've analyzed 10 years of maintenance logs. Most of the issues you've documented during night checks didn't result in system failures. That suggests the checks are precautionary rather than necessary. We can redirect those labor hours to more valuable activities. They didn't result in failures because I caught and fixed them before they became failures. That's the entire point. I understand you're attached to traditional approaches, but we need to trust the data and the technology. Your night checks are discontinued effective immediately. Focus your expertise on daytime preventive maintenance instead." The meeting ended with Trevor distributing tablets loaded with his new operational guidelines. Digital checklist, automated reporting systems, efficiency metrics. Everything designed by someone who'd never spent a night in a substation watching transformers that were older than he was, listening for the sounds that meant failure was coming. I drove home that afternoon at 5 p.m., the end of my official shift, for the first time in decades without planning to return at 11 p.m. Sarah was shocked to see me actually home for dinner. "Dad, you're here? At dinner time? Thought we could eat together, like a normal family." We made pasta and sat at the kitchen table talking about her volleyball season, her college plans, her friend drama. Normal parent-child conversation that had become rare enough to feel foreign. At 10 p.m., when I'd normally be getting ready to head back to the substation, I was helping Sarah study for her calculus exam instead. My phone buzzed at 10:45 p.m. A text from Marcus. "You coming in for the night check?" I texted back. Night checks have been discontinued per Trevor's operational guidelines. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Finally, "Are you serious?" Following the new protocol exactly as specified. Another pause. Then, "This is going to be interesting." Tuesday morning, I arrived at exactly 9 a.m., the start of my official shift, not 6:30 a.m. like I'd been doing for years. The overnight monitoring logs showed minor anomalies that I would have caught and corrected during the night check. Nothing critical yet, just the early warning signs I'd been preventing for 3 decades. Transformer 7's temperature had peaked at 152 degrees overnight, still within automated alarm thresholds, but 15 degrees higher than it should run. The cooling system was struggling, probably because the ambient temperature had dropped and nobody had made the manual adjustment I'd been doing every cold night for 20 years. I noted it in the log, but didn't correct it. Trevor's new protocol specifies that interventions only occurred when automated alarms triggered. By Tuesday afternoon, Trevor had brought in his consulting team. 3 people in their 20s carrying tablets and measuring equipment, asking questions about infrastructure they clearly didn't understand. They spent 2 hours trying to access historical maintenance data that wasn't digitized, because most of it existed in handwritten logs from Harold Vickers' era. Rob, one of the consultants, approached my desk. "We need the baseline performance data for your transformers. The digital records only go back to 2010. Most of our equipment predates digital record keeping. The baseline data is in the paper archives. Can you help us locate it?" I've got scheduled maintenance on the south grid this afternoon. The archives are in the basement storage room, organized chronologically. You'll want to start with the 1976 installation records. Can't you just show us which files we need? I'm following my official job description now. It specifies that my primary responsibility is hands-on maintenance and operation. Historical research falls under administrative duties which are outside my core role. Trevor's optimization plan emphasized that everyone should focus on their core competencies. The consultant stared at me like I'd just spoken a different language. This would take hours to search through manually. Probably. But that's why institutional knowledge is valuable. When you rely on data-driven approaches, you need to make sure you've actually captured all the relevant data. He walked away, muttering into his phone. 20 minutes later, Trevor was at my desk, irritation barely concealed behind his professional smile. "Rob, I need you to cooperate with the optimization assessment. Your resistance to change is noted, but it's not helpful. I'm not resisting anything. I'm following your operational guidelines exactly. You wanted everyone focused on core competencies and measurable outputs. My core competency is maintaining electrical equipment, not administrative research. This is about more than job descriptions. It's about being a team player. I've been a team player for 30 years. Now I'm being a protocol follower. Your protocols." His jaw tightened. "We'll discuss this further." But we didn't. Because Wednesday morning brought the first real problem. Transformer 4's cooling pump failed at 3:30 a.m. The automated alarm triggered, waking the on-call engineer, Marcus, who'd drawn the short straw. He called me at 3:45 a.m. "Rob, we've got a situation. Unit 4's running hot. Cooling system's down. What's the temperature reading?" 168 degrees and climbing. Alarm threshold is 180. Check the pump impeller. There's a manual override valve on the left side of the housing. If the impeller's jammed, you can bypass it temporarily using the secondary cooling loop. Where's the override valve? Left side, bottom access panel. Should be marked with a red tag. Silence on the line. Then, I don't see any red tag. It's been there since 1998. Small panel, about knee height. Rob, I'm looking at the left side of the housing. There's no access panel at knee height. That's when I realized the problem. Marcus had never worked on Unit 4 specifically. He knew the general transformer layout, but each unit had modifications made over decades. The access panel I was thinking of was on Unit 7, not Unit 4. Unit 4's override was on the right side, top access panel. I knew that because I'd used it personally a dozen times, but that knowledge existed only in my head and in my handwritten notes. I could have told him, could have walked him through the correct procedure, could have driven to the substation and fixed it myself in 15 minutes. Check the operations manual, I said instead. The cooling system overrides should be documented in Section 7. Marcus's voice had an edge of panic now. Rob, I've got maybe 20 minutes before this transformer hits critical temperature. I need your help. I'm following Trevor's protocols. On-call engineers are responsible for emergency response. My role is daytime preventive maintenance. If you need assistance, contact Director Hastings. He should be able to provide guidance. Rob, I'm sorry, Marcus, but I'm done taking responsibility for systems I'm not being paid to manage. Trevor wanted data-driven operations. The data says follow the manual. I hung up, sat in my dark bedroom listening to the silence. Sarah was asleep down the hall. For the first time in decades, I wasn't rushing to the substation to save equipment that should have been replaced before she was born. My phone rang again immediately. Trevor this time. What the hell is going on? Marcus says you refused to help with an emergency. I informed him to check the operations manual. Emergency response is the on-call engineer's responsibility per your operational guidelines. Don't be deliberately difficult. You know those systems better than anyone. I did know them. Past tense. Now I'm just the daytime preventive maintenance specialist. That's the role you've defined for me. Lives could be at risk if that transformer fails. Then maybe you should have kept the person who knew how to prevent transformer failures actively involved instead of eliminating the protocols that kept them running for 30 years. I hung up before he could respond. Marcus figured it out eventually. Took him 40 minutes and the help of 2 other engineers pulled from their homes. They found the override, bypassed the cooling pump, stabilized the temperature, but Unit 4 ran on the secondary cooling loop for the rest of the week because the replacement pump parts had to be ordered. And without the primary cooling system, the transformer was operating at reduced capacity, which meant load had to be shifted to other units that were already running near their limits. Wednesday afternoon, Trevor called a mandatory meeting. His confidence from Monday had been replaced with visible frustration. We've had a significant operational incident, he began. Transformer 4 experienced a cooling system failure that should have been resolved in minutes, but took over an hour due to what I'm calling inadequate emergency response protocols. He looked directly at me. Rob, your refusal to assist during a critical emergency is unacceptable. I'm formally documenting this as a performance issue. I followed the operational protocols you implemented. On-call engineers are responsible for emergency response. I'm not assigned to on-call rotation. Common sense dictates that when equipment is failing, whoever has knowledge helps immediately. Common sense also dictates that when someone has critical institutional knowledge, you don't eliminate the protocols that utilize that knowledge. You eliminated night checks that would have caught the pump failure before it became critical. You've reduced my role to daytime maintenance only. I'm doing exactly what you've defined as my job. This is insubordination. This is protocol compliance. But I'm happy to discuss expanding my responsibilities if we want to discuss expanding my compensation and authority appropriately. The room was silent. Trevor's face had gone red, but he couldn't argue with the logic. He'd created these protocols. I was just following them exactly. The meeting ended with no resolution. Trevor stalked back to his office. Marcus avoided eye contact. The other engineers looked at me like I'd just declared war on the company. That evening, Sarah asked me what was happening. I stopped fixing their problems for free, I told her. Now they're realizing how many problems I was fixing. Is this going to get you fired? Probably. But I'm 52 years old. I've given them 30 years. If they fire me for following the rules they created, that tells you everything about what they really valued. Thursday morning brought the real crisis. I arrived at 9 a.m. to find the facility in controlled chaos. Overnight, Transformer 7, the unit I'd been manually managing for 2 decades, had started overheating. The automated systems had logged the temperature increase but hadn't triggered alarms because it was within acceptable parameters. What the sensors couldn't detect was that the temperature trend indicated imminent cooling system failure. The same kind of failure that would have been obvious to anyone walking the night checks. By morning, Unit 7 was running at 172 degrees. Not critical yet, but climbing steadily. And because Unit 4 was still operating on reduced capacity, there was no good way to shift load away from Unit 7 without overloading the remaining transformers. Trevor had called an emergency meeting with corporate. Regional VP Martin Kelso was on video conference, along with 2 executives I didn't recognize. They'd been briefed on the situation overnight. "Rob, we need your assessment," Martin said without preamble. "How serious is this?" "Very serious. Unit 7's cooling system is failing the same way Unit 4's did. But Unit 7 handles 40% of Millbrook's residential load. If it fails completely, we're looking at a blackout for about 20,000 homes. Can we shift that load to other transformers? Not without overloading them. Unit 4 is already on reduced capacity. Units 3 and 6 are running near maximum. If we push them harder, we risk cascading failures." One of the corporate executives leaned forward. "What's your recommendation?" "Emergency shutdown of Unit 7 for cooling system replacement. Implement rolling blackouts across the distribution area to manage reduced capacity. Timeline for full restoration is probably 48 or 72 hours minimum." "That's unacceptable," Trevor interjected. "A controlled shutdown will cause massive customer impact. There has to be another solution." I looked at him directly. "The other solution is the one I've been implementing for 20 years. Manual monitoring and adjustment of the cooling system, but you eliminated that protocol. We can reinstate it temporarily." Trevor was trying to save face. "You can resume night checks until we resolve the equipment issues." "No." The room went silent. Martin Kelso's face on the video screen registered shock. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean that I'm not resuming night checks. You eliminated them as part of your optimization plan. You determined they weren't necessary. I'm respecting your management decision." "Rob, be reasonable," Martin said. "We need your expertise right now. You needed my expertise for 30 years. You just didn't want to pay for it appropriately. I've been doing the work of a facility supervisor for 8 years without the title or compensation. I've been maintaining equipment that should have been replaced decades ago. And when I asked for recognition, you hired a consultant with no field experience to manage operations he doesn't understand. This isn't the time for grievances. This is exactly the time. Because right now you're seeing what happens when you take institutional knowledge for granted. Unit 7 is failing because nobody walked the night checks. Unit 4 failed because the on-call engineer didn't have the experience to respond quickly. You've got 48-year-old equipment held together with expertise you've systematically devalued. And now you want me to fix it for free. "Name your price," one of the corporate executives said. I smiled without humor. Full facility supervisor role with appropriate authority and compensation. Immediate replacement approval for all 4 main transformers. Hiring authority for 2 additional experienced engineers. And Trevor reports to me, not the other way round. Trevor stood up. "This is extortion. You can't hold the town hostage." "I'm not holding anyone hostage. I'm stating the terms under which I'm willing to resume responsibilities I've been performing without recognition for years. You're welcome to fix this yourself using the data-driven approaches you prefer." Martin Kelso held up a hand. "Everyone take a breath. Rob, we need time to discuss your demands. Can you at least advise Trevor on immediate stabilization steps? I can advise that you follow emergency protocols for equipment failure. Controlled shutdown, rolling blackouts, emergency service restoration timeline. It's all documented in the operations manual. Section 12, I believe. You know that manual doesn't cover equipment this old. Then maybe you should have replaced it when I recommended it. 2014, 2016, 2018, 2020, 2022. 5 separate replacement requests, all denied." I stood up and walked out of the conference room. Behind me, I could hear raised voices and frantic phone calls starting. They had about 6 hours before Unit 7 hit critical temperature. Less if the cooling degradation accelerated. I drove home. Sarah was getting ready for school. "Shouldn't you be at work?" she asked. "Took a personal day. Want me to drive you to school?" She looked at me suspiciously. "What's really going on?" "They're about to learn an expensive lesson about the difference between cost optimization and operational effectiveness. The power's going to go out, isn't it?" "Probably. And you could stop it." "I could. But I've stopped it for 30 years without recognition. Time for them to see what happens when I don't." Sarah grabbed her backpack and hugged me. "About time, Dad." By 2 p.m., Transformer 7 hit critical temperature. Trevor authorized an emergency shutdown to prevent permanent damage. 20,000 homes lost power immediately. The cascade effects hit within an hour. Traffic lights out, schools closing early, businesses shutting down, hospitals switching to backup generators. My phone exploded with calls. Trevor, Marcus, Martin Kelso, even the mayor of Millbrook. I let every call go to voicemail. At 4 p.m., I drove to Sarah's school to pick her up early. The building was dark, running on emergency lighting. "This is crazy," Sarah said as we drove through town. "Nothing works without electricity. That's the lesson. Everyone takes infrastructure for granted until it fails. Then suddenly the person maintaining it seems pretty important." By evening, the local news was covering the blackout. 20,000 residents without power, no clear timeline for restoration. Tri-State Energy had issued a statement about equipment failure and emergency repairs. Trevor did an interview where he talked about aging infrastructure and the challenges of maintaining legacy systems. He looked exhausted and barely coherent. Friday morning, Martin Kelso showed up at my house personally. He looked like he'd been awake for 48 hours straight. "Rob, we need to talk." I invited him into my kitchen, made coffee, let him sit in uncomfortable silence for a minute before I spoke. "How bad is it?" "We've got engineers from 3 contractors working on Unit 7. Best estimate is 36 hours before we can restore full power. The governor's office is asking questions. Our corporate insurance is evaluating liability. And we've got about 20,000 very angry residents. What do you need from me? Everything. We need you to take over facility operations immediately. We're prepared to offer facility supervisor role, $140,000 salary, full authority over maintenance decisions, and emergency approval for transformer replacement. Trevor will be reassigned to a regional planning role with no direct operational authority." I shook my head. Not enough. "Rob, you're offering me what I should have had 8 years ago, what you denied me last week. I'm not accepting yesterday's terms for today's crisis. My terms haven't changed. Full supervisor authority, $180,000 salary, immediate replacement approval for all 4 transformers, hiring authority for 2 senior engineers, and a written commitment to implement my long-term infrastructure modernization plan without interference. That's a $15 million commitment. That's the cost of doing it right instead of cheap. You've been running 50-year-old equipment on minimal maintenance for decades. Either invest in proper infrastructure or accept that blackouts will become more frequent. Your choice. Martin was silent for a long moment. I need board approval for those expenditures. Then get it. You've got 20,000 people without power and a governor asking why your company couldn't maintain basic service. How long do you think that conversation takes? He made phone calls from my kitchen for the next hour. By noon, I had a formal offer letter with every term I'd requested. I read it twice, had Sarah read it to make sure I wasn't missing anything, then signed. I arrived at the substation at 1 p.m. The contractor teams had been working on Unit 7 but weren't making real progress because they didn't understand the custom modifications made over decades. I walked through the facility, assessed the situation, and had the cooling system temporarily operational by 4 p.m. Not perfect, but functional enough to restore power. By 6 p.m. Friday evening, Millbrook had electricity again. By Monday, I'd submitted purchase orders for 4 new transformers. By the end of the month, I'd hired 2 experienced engineers who understood that maintaining infrastructure requires more than data analytics. Trevor lasted another 3 weeks before accepting a position at a different company. No hard feelings on my part. He'd learned an expensive lesson about the difference between consulting theory and operational reality. 6 months later, the new transformers were installed. State-of-the-art equipment with modern monitoring systems that actually worked. The facility ran smoother than it had in decades. I was working normal hours, 9 to 5 most days, with actual on-call rotation shared among properly trained staff. Sarah's volleyball season was in full swing. I made every home game, sat in the bleachers with other parents, cheered when she served an ace, took her for ice cream after wins. Normal parent stuff that had been impossible when I was the only thing standing between the town and darkness. One evening, after a game, she asked me if I felt bad about what happened. About the blackout, 20,000 people without power. Yeah, like you could have prevented it. I could have. But if I'd prevented it, nothing would have changed. They'd still be running 50-year-old equipment, still paying me like a technician while giving me a supervisor's responsibilities, still hiring unqualified managers because of family connections instead of competence. Sometimes the only way to prove something is critical is to let it fail. But people suffered. People would have suffered more if I'd kept enabling a broken system. That substation was a disaster waiting to happen. I was just the person holding it together with duct tape and institutional knowledge. Eventually it would have failed catastrophically, probably when I wasn't there to fix it. Better a controlled demonstration of failure than an uncontrolled catastrophe. She thought about that. So you're saying sometimes you have to let things break to fix them properly? Exactly. Smart kid. A year after the blackout, Tri-State Energy was using Millbrook as their model facility. Modern equipment, proper staffing, maintenance protocols that didn't rely on one person's midnight walks. They'd even sent other facility supervisors to train with me, learning the lessons I'd learned over 30 years. The expensive way. Here's what they don't teach in business schools. Infrastructure isn't glamorous. It's not innovative or disruptive or optimizable through analytics. It's the unglamorous work of maintaining systems that everyone takes for granted until they fail. And the people who do that work, who keep the lights on while everyone else sleeps, deserve more than platitudes about dedication. They deserve recognition, compensation, and respect. For 30 years, I kept a town running on equipment that should have been replaced before my daughter was born. I did it through expertise, dedication, and personal sacrifice. And when they decided that expertise wasn't valuable enough to compensate properly, I stepped back and let them learn the hard way. The blackout lasted 36 hours. The lesson should last a lifetime. If you've ever been the person who keeps things running in the background while everyone else takes credit, if you've ever been told your expertise isn't as valuable as someone's MBA, if you've ever fixed problems invisibly for years only to be replaced by someone with credentials and no experience, remember this: your value doesn't disappear when they can't see it. It becomes visible the moment you stop making their ignorance your emergency. The best revenge isn't sabotage. It's letting a broken system reveal itself without you there to hold it together. Drop a comment if you've ever been the only person who knew how something critical actually worked. Subscribe for more stories about what happens when companies forget that some knowledge can't be replaced with data analytics. And if you're currently doing critical work that nobody appreciates, remember, eventually they'll understand. Usually right after everything stops working,